Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so sorry that I can't be there physically. I had some back issues, better not to risk things. But I do love your space. And I also am very grateful for that, the poem and the carve out of take a deep breath. And oh, by the way, I get to look at the ocean also. That was beautiful and wonderful music. So I really appreciate that breather. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today. So, you know, there's a lot going on, and we all know that our rights are under attack. We all know that something very wrong is happening. And we all know in our rational minds that we're talking about due process, we're talking about transparency, we're talking about accountability, we're talking about, most of us are talking about immigration right now. But I also want to talk about power, and I want to talk about how all these systems of oppression are linked because we tend to put them into silos. And when one thing is grabbing all the attention and all of our energy, the other things that are also connected tend to get neglected. So today I'm going to talk to you about the criminal legal system, and I'm also going to talk to you about immigration a little bit towards the end. But all of these systems, we refer to them as systems of oppression with long histories. And by putting them into different silos, we actually succumb to the powers that be in their overall attempt to divide and conquer and separate us. So let's talk a little bit about power. You don't need to be a lawyer to know that something very wrong is happening in the country right now. You just have to be ethical. You just have to have an ethical system to understand that something is going wrong. And it does relate to power. We all know when power is being exerted against us, even if we can't articulate it. And most of us can't articulate it unless it's just sort of this articulation of rage. But the reaction we have is very extreme. So we become enraged because we are ethical and because we feel powerless. And we are left with like almost an impotent outcry and childlike outcry of, but that's not fair, right? And we know we sound like children. We say, but that's not fair. But, right? We feel that way inside. And like children, we know we sound like children. And it's actually designed to reduce us, to reduce our dignity, and it works when we are left with that, oh, but this isn't fair. And so it sort of leads us to think about bullying, right? We think about when you were bullied as a kid. That's very clearly power being exerted against us. We can see the bully, you can hear the clear threats from the bully. Now, think about if you've ever been bullied as an adult, which happens all the time. Adult bullying is more insidious and it's more clever and hidden and it is more undermining. Chances are good if you're feeling crazy and you're feeling like you're 12 years old, you are revisiting feelings from middle school of when you were bullied, and chances are good you're being bullied as an adult. Now let's think about the state doing the bullying through policy. State sanctioned bullying policy written into law meant to reduce dignity and exert power over entire populations. It's meant to undermine dignity and humanity. So incredibly well executed and insidious that the targeted populations themselves buy into what is being told about them. This is known as the psychology of the oppressed. So we have examples of, say, women being actually articulating, well, what was she wearing when she was sexually assaulted? And it must have been her fault. Women buy into this. This is an example of the psychology of oppressed. We actually will buy into what is being told about us because it's been told about us for so long and we don't even know to rebel against it. It's actually embedded in the fabric of how we think. Bourdieu called this symbolic violence, and this is what we call the psychology of the oppressed. And so the resistance tactics that we need to use need to be happening on many fronts, one of which is vocabulary and framing. And so we need to think about new vocabularies to reset our minds, right? So when we think about, say, substance use disease and mental illness, we want to think about them in a way that we're not linking them to the criminal legal system, because we want to think of them in more as medical issues than we do as criminal issues. And so we're trying to get your minds to be retrained to reframe, because when you reframe the problem, then you have to reframe the solution. And the criminal legal system is not the solution to mental illness and substance use disease, nor homelessness as well. So part of what I'm going to be doing today is giving you new language and new ways to think about these problems. But first, let me share a little bit about, also the other thing is, when we say criminal justice system, we've begun to say criminal legal system because there's nothing just about the criminal system. So we try not to say the criminal justice system anymore. So this is part of the reframing of your mind. First, let me share a little bit about myself before we go into the criminal legal system and some of the work that we're doing. Um, I got mostly involved in college in this work, like a lot of people. But I can say that even dating back to being a kid, I would be, I would see the newspaper, I would see there was a problem, something felt really super unfair. And I remember reading, this is the problem, and then by the second or third paragraph, the ACLU had swooped in with a cape. At that point, it was Norman Siegel who was swooping in with a cape to save the day in the newspaper article. And I remember as a kid going, hey, I think I might want to work for them someday. The other thing is, as a child, I didn't know it, but I did have an anti-authoritarian streak. I would sit in temple and quietly kind of rebel internally against the handed to me idea that God was a male in temple. I remember doing this as a kid, going, well, how do they know? How come? Why? Or that my dad told me that I can't have a bat mitzvah because I'm a girl and it doesn't really matter. So I had these little rebellions coming up, but I just wasn't aware enough of them to be able to articulate them. When I got to college, I did gravitate towards the political group of kids that were starting to organize on issues like the alternative lifestyles. At that point, it was what it was being called, being gay. And I've lived through the AIDS crisis in college and Ronald Reagan. And so I started becoming more involved in college, and we were organizing the anti-Reagan rallies on campus. I was getting involved with student government. I ran to become a student senator, terrified of public speaking, overcame that with a little help from my friends, and became a student senator, and then also became the delegate from our campus to the SUNY statewide student association, which also then taught me how to lobby, train other people to lobby, bring van loads of kids to Albany from Oneonta to lobby on tuition hikes, and also to try to stop the 21-year-old drinking age at that time, to dating myself. So so that's how I got my start. And then when I was raising my kids, and the Iraq War broke out, and we had Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and George Bush and the Iraq War. And I was, in the suburbs raising my kids and feeling really frustrated, not knowing what to do. And so I started volunteering for the Nassau County, New York Civil Liberties Union. And Barbara Bernstein, some of you may remember Barbara. I call her the Lioness. She was the director at the time. She was on her way out. She was handing it over to a new director. The New York City office of NYCLU had started to consolidate all the offices from around the state. And so I came in at that point. I sat on the board for a little while. The executive directors who came in after Barbara really trained me on how to do intakes and direct service and lobby and get involved in all of those things. And so I stayed involved. And then in 2014, a position opened up in the New York City office. And I went for it and I got it. And I was coordinating all the offices around the state. And then Jason Starr, who some of you also may remember, was the director in Nassau County. He left and I applied for the position. And that's how I ended up here. Quite a journey. And so I always recommend to young people, make sure that you are volunteering and make sure that you're doing internships in the areas that you want to become involved in. So that's how I got here. And I did a lot of education along the way because I am a very hungry learner. Got the 3 master's degrees and was raising my kids. And then here we are. So today we're going to be doing so. What as I entered this job, I think I had maybe 2 or 3 months until the 2016 election, and then Trump was elected, and we were off to the races, and everything's quite frankly been a blur since then. But we went through COVID, we had the George Floyd situation, and we also got very, very involved in police reform on Long Island. So I work with the Nassau County Police Department very closely on protest monitoring. So these are two separate things. One is hounding them about behaving better and being more transparent, and then separately on protest monitoring to keep protesters safe. And so I've had the privilege of working on police reform issues and also making sure that protesters are safe. We also in 2019, I became extremely involved in the bail reform fight. And that was my introduction really into the criminal legal system. And how intricate it is and all the reforms that need to happen and all the injustices that are perpetrated inside the system. So I got very involved in criminal legal work and trying to work on many, many of the bills that are trying to change that system. And that's the stuff that the crux of what I want to talk to you about today, to give you a bird's eye view of what's going on in the criminal legal system and all the changes that need to happen. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about immigration because there's a really super important bill that we need passed to make sure that what's happening in Minneapolis doesn't happen here. And so I'll share a little bit of that with you, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So today, as we talk about the criminal legal system, and as I share with you some of the bills that we're trying to get done, I also want to share some facts with you about the system that will make more sense to you as I go through the bills. But let me share these facts with you. Then I'm going to show you a quick video about what we're trying to achieve, and then we'll go into the bills. So the criminal legal system, first of all, number one, 98% of the people in jails and prisons are there because they took a plea deal. They have not had a trial. They were forced into plea deals. Number two, over 70% of the people in jails and prisons have mental illness. That's a huge number. That's a huge number. And that again goes to having a mental illness is a medical problem. It's not a criminal legal problem. So I just wanted to put that on your plate as well. The majority of people in jails and prisons in the United States and in New York State are people of color. If you go sit in a courthouse in Nassau County, I call it the mill, the arraignment courts, you will see a predominant number of Black and brown people getting funneled into that system. And when I talk about policing, we're not going to talk a lot about policing today, but we're going to talk a little bit about it because policing is the gateway into the criminal legal system, and how the police function is very important. The other thing I want to tell you about policing is the Nassau County Police. We've been tracking them since the George Floyd reforms. Not reforms. There have not been many reforms in Nassau County at all. But we have been tracking use of force, arrests, complaints, pedestrian stops, vehicle stops. And we know that over the past 5 years since George Floyd's death, the Nassau County Police continue to have between 2 and 7% higher rates of arrests, use of force, pedestrian stops, and vehicle stops of Latino people and Black people in Nassau County. That's a given, which means if that's the gateway into the criminal legal system, that's going to be represented inside the criminal legal system as well after you get past police custody. The other thing I want to tell you is the human brain is not fully developed until the age of 25. This is going to matter for when I talk about raise the age. I also want to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about it now. We're not going to talk about a bill related to it, but there are bills related to this. Police in schools are thought of by parents as a good thing because of all the school shootings, but be aware of the fact that putting police in schools means that you are introducing the criminal legal system into the hallways of the schools, which means in places like New York City, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, bigger cities, kids are going from the halls of their schools into Rikers Island directly. Okay. Children in high schools are supposed to be making mistakes. Their brains are not fully developed. They make bad judgment calls. And it is up to educators to be with them and know that and be in charge of discipline. And too often, all over New York State, we have police actually doing the discipline. Now, if you add that maybe that child has a mental illness or that child is a special ed child and these police are not trained, then we're talking about an even bigger problem. Okay, so I just want you to also sort of think about reframing the idea of police in schools. Police in schools also means they're walking the hall, they're hearing intel about social groups. So when you hear people say, oh, we found out these kids were gang members, they're not necessarily gang members. They may have gone to a party where there was some gang members, but that's what's going on. The police are able now to make friends with and eavesdrop and put their arm around the kids in the school hallways and say, hey, what's going on? And the kid feels safe and will start giving up information that the police and the DA will then use. And this has happened when it comes to so many kids getting arrested in Suffolk County years ago and being deported and put on gang databases. So just want to put that all on your plate. And then finally, people over the age of 55 have a recidivism rate of less than 0.1%. That's going to matter when I talk to you about some parole bills. And then also the deaths in jails and prisons tripled this year in New York State, and suicides doubled in 2024 in prisons around New York State. Robert Brooks is a name you may have heard. Robert Brooks was killed by corrections officers, and 9 people died during a wildcat strike of corrections officers last year in New York State. I can tell you, I'm getting phone calls since November that the air conditioning is on at the Nassau County Jail. And I'm trying to do whatever I can about that. But I get phone calls from inside the jail all the time. So this is just to give you a little snapshot of what you need to know as we go into this discussion. And then a little background on policing and on the 13th Amendment and the carceral system. I don't know how many people have seen the documentary 13. If you haven't, you should watch it. It describes all of this. If you haven't seen the Alabama Solution, you should definitely watch that as well. It's a snapshot of what is going on in an Alabama prison. And I can promise you, it is also going on in New York State prisons. I've been there. And jails are even more in the dark. So it's all going on right here. So policing, the history of policing dates back to slave patrols. The first police forces that were formed to capture runaway slaves. Put another way, to protect white property. And we still think of police as protecting our property, right? We see a homeless person in a predominantly white, affluent neighborhood, and immediately somebody calls the police. It's not illegal to be without a house. As a matter of fact, that person probably needs some help and support, not the police. And so this is where your roots as ethical humanists go when we talk about what is needed. Compassion is needed, and support is needed, and resources are needed, not the police, not the criminal legal system. Um, the 13th Amendment, I'm going to read it to you and then see if you can hear the loophole in it. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Can anybody hear the loophole in that one? You can just yell out if you want. The loophole
Yeah, except
is
where it was convicted of a crime.
correct. That's right. And so what ended up happening was they heard the loophole loud and clear, right? People had lost free labor after the Civil War. So, how do we get free labor back? We pass a lot of criminal codes that will criminalize the people who have just been released from providing their free labor. We're going to recriminalize them, make sure we get them back into prisons, and then mandate that they work while they're in prison. And this is the direct through line from the Civil War through Reconstruction to today's carceral system. We have a prison in New York, Auburn, upstate, was one of the first in the country to mandate free labor be given by people who have been convicted of crimes. So let's talk about incarceration. Let's talk about law and order. I'm going to show you a video, and then we're going to talk about some of the solutions to some of these problems that we're chasing that we hope to get some of your help on. So, a couple of things. We know that the law and order narrative works. It's worked since Richard Nixon. It's worked since Roger Ailes and is still through Roger Ailes working. It is alive and well. It is being used to now deploy military in our cities. Law and order messaging works. It scares people. It tells them we want to keep you safe. And by the way, you're not safe. And we're going to insinuate who you're not safe from. And these people look a certain way. And that is all coded inside the law and order narrative. Our mission is to try to disentangle our own minds and your minds from the law and order narrative to understand that the intervention of policing happens pretty late in someone's life. And if we can stop putting all those resources towards that intervention and start putting the resources into the communities that are under resourced, under supported, who don't have what other neighborhoods have, and start giving families the support they need using those resources, then we won't need the law and order narrative. That the way to real public safety is to put these resources not into policing, not into the incarceration system, which is literally the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over with no result at all, and put the resources into communities, into families, into places where we know we can support human potential. And so that's what these pieces of legislation are all about. But more importantly, we all need to learn how to spread this message, reject law and order narrative, because now it's being used to the extreme by Mr. Trump, and say, okay, the real fix is people and potential and putting resources at the very beginning of somebody's life and with their families and with their communities to make sure that we're not needing the carceral system as much as we do now. So I'm going to show you a video about the carceral system, and then we'll go into the bills. And also, somebody, if I'm getting into trouble on time, let me know. All right, so I'm going to go into share.
More than half of victims of violent crime don't even call the police in the first place. They prefer nothing to everything we have to offer. The vast majority of crime survivors' pain goes unhealed. What the existence of restorative justice means is that we can no longer pretend we don't know what else to do. As a country, we're really good at punishment. It's passive. It doesn't require people to act, to think. It certainly doesn't require them to change. When we lock people up, we excuse them from their responsibility to answer for what they've done. Restorative justice is a process to hold them accountable. It's a tool. People take turns answering questions like what happened, what needs arise, whose responsibility is it to meet those needs, and how is that person going to do it? It requires someone to take responsibility, to repair things as much as possible, and to never commit that harm again. This isn't about feeling sorry, it's about doing sorry. Things like go to school, get a job, pay restitution, apologize, do community service. Restorative justice practices have been used to address low-level infractions like vandalism, up to addressing the impact of murders on the surviving family members. Restorative justice processes are first and foremost about meeting the needs of people who are hurt. Sometimes the person who can make the greatest contribution to a survivor's healing is the person who harmed them. To come through trauma, we need answers to our questions. So say, my life was never the same after you hurt me like that. Crime survivors want the most safety possibly available. So if incarceration actually produced safety, we would have the safest country in human history. That's not what we have. The core drivers of violence are shame, isolation, an inability to meet one's economic needs, and exposure to violence. And we bake those into prisons to try and keep people from committing further violence. Incarceration exposes people to exactly the things that increase the likelihood that they'll go on to harm others. People who are hurt deserve a process that will help them heal. People who are responsible for crime have an obligation to be accountable for that. All of us deserve responses to crime that actually make us safer. Our current criminal justice system doesn't deliver any of those, and restorative justice at its best delivers them all.
Thanks, everyone. I'm hoping that I turned that off. Let me make sure.
Watch what cheese does to your waistline.
Gruyere. Now these are
Hold on. Okay. I think I'm good. I hope that doesn't pop back up. I'll be right there with you. Good. Okay. Hi. I hope everybody's able to hear that. Okay. I'm going to go into some of the bills. Now, the legislative session starts in January and goes through June. We encourage, I'm up in Albany at least 2 or 3 times a month. We encourage anybody that can get on a bus to please join us for lobbying, but we also do in-district lobbying. So I'm going to ask, Patricia to send out some information to you guys after this with a couple of action items, but also to let you know about opportunities to get on the bus, or if you are interested in lobbying in district to your state senators and your state assembly people, to please, let us know. And we have we do lobby trainings. We take you on visits in district. We also blast out scripts. Usually I send all the action items to Ken and Susan all the time. Ken, they get a lot of emails from me. So if you're interested in any of these things, just let Patricia or Ken and Susan know. So there's gonna be a lot of information coming at you, and I didn't want to do a PowerPoint because it just that gets boring. But if you want to write these down, and I'll segment them for you. The first campaign I'm going to talk about is called "Communities Not Cages." I love the name of this campaign. Um, the campaign is about addressing the harms done by the Rockefeller drug laws, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, from the 1970s, and reducing the harm of mandatory minimum sentences. So this is really about reducing the number of people that are going into the system. And so the very first bill is called the Marvin Mayfield Act, which Marvin was somebody who was incarcerated. It is also, by the way, this campaign is led by formerly incarcerated people. And so it's a coalition all over the state of people who have been incarcerated. We actually work with people who are currently incarcerated for them to be able to organize inside the prisons and let people inside the prisons know that people outside are doing work to try to help the situation. So the Marvin Mayfield Act, Marvin died last year. He had a lot of ailments that he had accumulated while he was in prison. But he was a ferocious advocate, and we named this bill after him. This would eliminate mandatory minimums because we want to be able to give judges discretion and be able to look at mitigating circumstances. And the mandatory minimum sentences are being used as weapons by prosecutors to coerce plea deals. Remember, I said 98% of people who are in prisons and jails are there because of plea deals. That's because of this. Because 10 minutes before you're going to get arraigned and you have to make a decision, are you going to plead guilty or are you going to take a plea deal? Your lawyer will come to you and say, well, you can go to trial, but you're risking 25 to 30 years in prison. Or you could take a plea deal and do 15 years in prison instead. And so this bill will allow judges to say, okay, you know what? This is more of like a 10-year or a 5-year or community service, or there are mitigating circumstances here, or all of these things. Judges have actually written pieces of, they've written op-eds saying, I have so many times not wanted to sentence a person to 20, 25, 30 years because it didn't call for it. But according to the law, I didn't have a choice. So we have a lot of judges who are actually supporting this law, and it will stop the prosecutors from hanging that anvil over people's heads while they stand in front of judges and say, oh my gosh. I mean, I'm working with somebody who had maybe 3 minutes between when he had to make a decision and when the plea deal was offered in front of a judge, in front of the courtroom. So this law will take care of that. The Second Look Act is part of this package. And this says if you have a good record inside prison, and if you committed your crime before you were 25 years old, and if you've served over half of your sentence, you have a right for a judge to retake a look at your sentence, a different judge. It doesn't mean automatic get out of jail free card. It means you have a chance for your sentence to be reevaluated depending on all of these other things. So that's the Second Look Act. The third one is, I love this one. This is called earned time. When people are in prison, there's something called earned time and good time. Good time is when they follow the rules inside, when they don't have any checks against them just for following the rules. That's good time. Earned time is when there are programs inside that they're taking advantage of. I don't know if anybody saw the movie Sing Sing. Up in Sing Sing prison, they actually had a drama club, and the movie is about the men that took part in that program. And that's the kind of programs we're talking about. But we're also talking about anger management programs. We're talking about learning programs that will prepare people for jobs outside when they are released, because many of these people are going to be released. So what kind of shape do we want them in when they are released? We want them to be able to have developed skills. So that's earned time. The Earned Time Act will provide more opportunities for those programs inside the jails and prisons. And it will also make sure that when you earn these points towards reducing your sentence, they cannot be taken away from you. So corrections officers wield a tremendous amount of power inside prisons and jails. They use whatever power they have to threaten the people inside, which we call incarcerated individuals. We don't call them inmates or prisoners. And so the Earned Time Act will make sure. So if a corrections officer gets their eye on you, and you might have tried to assert one of your rights, and now you become a target, that corrections officer can take away all the good time you've earned and all the earned time that you've earned, the merit time that you've earned, and just take it away. And this law will make sure that that can't happen. So that this is the Communities Not Cages package, and it goes after mandatory minimums. Now, I just want to sort of say that the reason there are so many bills is because there's so many different entry points of the law. And so that when the advocates started looking at the carceral system and saying, what interventions do we need here to funnel less people in and be more rehabilitative and change the character of the system, it's because there were so many different points of law that needed to be addressed. So that's the Communities Not Cages package. It's focused on having less people funneled into the system. The next package is called RAP, Releasing Aging People from Prison. You might see it as RAPP, and it's 2 bills. And this is aimed towards reducing the population inside, right? So this is for people over 55 who have served over half of their sentences, who we know the recidivism rate of people over the age of 55 is less than 0.1%. I work with a lot of people on this campaign who have come out of prison and who are now doing lots of good work. And so one is elder parole and one is fair and timely parole. Elder parole allows incarcerated people age 55 or older who have served 15 years to be eligible for parole. So many sentences include the fact that you're not eligible for parole ever. And these would allow people over the age of 55 who have done work inside, who have done things to improve themselves, be able to at least have a shot at parole. And again, not a get out of jail free card, but at least to be able to sit in front of a parole board. Now, once they get in front of the parole board, notoriously, the parole boards have always just said, this is your initial crime. We're not giving you parole. Never looking at what have they done since then. Some people have become clergy members while they're inside. Some people become teachers. Some people get their law degrees. Some people create programs and mentor and are doing all sorts of good things while they're serving their time. And the parole boards don't look at those things usually ever. And so the fair and timely bill, which is the second piece of this, will ensure that the parole boards have to look at the way you've spent your time inside instead of just looking at what was your original crime. So that's the RAP campaign, releasing aging people from prison. One of the other things that we're going to be fighting this year is in 2017, New York passed the raise the age law, effectively ending the practice of automatically charging 16 and 17-year-olds as adults. So we were charging 16 and 17-year-olds as adults. I don't know how many of you know 16 or 17-year-olds. Seriously not formed adults. Science shows that. And so Raise the Age was making sure that people were being put into family court who were under a certain age. We are now starting to get pushback. Now, as you know, when we did bail reform in 2019, they immediately came after bail reform. And so for 3 years, they chipped away at bail reform until they've taken most of what we wanted from bail reform, they've removed a lot of it. Then they said, okay, well, this is getting old. We can't go after bail reform anymore. Let's go after discovery. Discovery went with bail reform, which is all legally technical. I'm not going to go into it too much. But then they went after the discovery improvements that we did. And they did that for 2 years and they got what they wanted. So they hammered away at bail, then they hammered away at the discovery. And then they said, okay, well, we can't take anything more out of discovery. What are we going to do next year? Well, let's go after raise the age. It's literally their strategy. So this year, there's going to be a big battle in Albany. They're going to try to chip away at raise the age. They're going to try to they're going to try to lower the age where people can be tried as adults. And we're going to need a lot of people supporting us on this. And what we're saying back to them is, well, raise the age was supposed to be accompanied by a big budget item that would actually provide support for youth and programming and rehabilitation along with making sure they're not charged as adults. Not just, okay, you're good because you're under 18, have a nice life, but okay, you're under 18, we're not going to charge you as an adult, but we are going to give you these services and these supports. And raise the age was supposed to come with all of that, and it didn't. So we are going to be fighting for those budget items to support raise the age. Don't roll back raise the age, reinforce it. So that's going to be our message for raise the age. I'm sure you've also heard about HALT, solitary confinement. It was really unbelievable. I want to say what was going on, but it still is going on, that people were being put in what's called the SHU, a solitary housing unit, for months on end with no contact with humans. Um, really closed down rooms for months. I mean, I have a friend who actually is doing a lot of work right now on criminal justice reform, who, as a 19-year-old, spent months and months in solitary confinement in a prison in New York State. Now, picture if you have autism or if you have a mental illness and you're put into solitary for months. And that's going on every day in New York State prisons. So we passed HALT, and now they're looking to roll back HALT as well, because the corrections officers are saying, well, what are we supposed to do with people who are a problem? And when we passed HALT, we said you have to build other units so that this exact problem that you're saying right now, what do we do with people who are a problem, or even to protect them, their own selves? What do we do with them? So now they're looking to roll back HALT instead of solve problems, to make sure that people are not put in solitary. So the duration and the limit on inside HALT says generally prohibits placing an incarcerated person in segregated confinement for more than 15 days or 20 days within a 60-day period. That's still a lot, right? I mean, there have been people all over the country who've said they've been in solitary confinement for years. Mental health protections were put into HALT, prohibits placing individuals with a serious mental illness in segregated confinement, and requires mental health screenings and heightened care for those who are confined. That's not going on. They were mandated to establish alternative residences for as an alternative to solitary confinement, and it applies to all states and all prisons and county jails in New York State. So in Nassau County, they don't have a SHU, segregated housing unit. They have what's called Keep Lock. So they don't have a segregated area. They just have a place. They just have your cell, but they'll keep you in there for 23 hours a day with no recreation at all. So we call it Keep Lock when there is not a SHU. Okay. So I think I have two left. Yeah, two left. And then, and then we could do Q&A. This package is called 13 Forward and is slavery and act. We've never outlawed slavery. This goes to the 13th Amendment that I read to you before. And it will outlaw slavery in New York, which means say to people, yes, you're incarcerated, and yes, you've been sentenced to incarceration for a crime, but that doesn't mean that you are mandated to work. So that's the first piece of this package. The second piece is if you want to work, we're going to give you the kind of work where that will improve your skills for when you get out. And the third piece of this package is safety precautions, because people are working in unsafe conditions. And this will create a board that makes sure that your conditions are safe when you do work inside prison, and that you have a place to go if your working conditions are not safe. So that's the 13th Forward campaign. And then the last one is Youth Justice Opportunity Act, which kind of goes along with Raise the Age in that it creates a young adult status between the ages of 19 and 25, recognizing that the brain is not fully developed until the age of 25. So that's the Youth Justice Opportunity Act. Yeah, so that's it. Oh, and Daniel's Law also, sorry, in Rochester, trying to make sure that police are not the major responders to mental health crises, but that the mental health professionals are the first responders to mental health crises. So that's Daniel's Law. So yeah, so that's that. Since we're running out of time, yes, is that correct? Yes.
Hi, Susan. Oh, my goodness, you always bring so much information, clarity, intelligence, and the feeling of action is things are happening to us. I personally could listen to you forever, but but we do have a time limit here. So I'm going to actually ask Ken Pfeiffer, who's the chair of the Social Action Committee, to field a little Q&A with you, especially since we can't do it afterwards. I think it'd be nice for people online, especially to get to just ask a couple of questions. And I ask people to limit them to questions, not their reactions, only because we don't have time for a discussion.
So thank you, Susan. We are always impressed with the way in which you balance wisdom and content. So we really do appreciate that. We have a vision in the Social Action Committee that we weren't able to fully realize today, largely because of the weather, which is when we have social action speakers, we will have a time after the platform to gather around and to ask questions to the speaker. We'll be doing that for the next two presentations, one by Howard Simon. His talk will be There's No Giving Up on Democracy, and of course, Congressman Tom Suozzi, a public policy conversation with the community. So we will try and do that. But in the meantime, since we have you, I think I'll start with folks in the room and give them the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. We'll try to take 10 or 15 minutes at the most, and then we'll move to the people who are online. I see there's a few people already with their hands up. So let me start in here and ask folks any questions they have for Susan. Rob has his hand up.
Susan, thank you very much. I want to present this to you. Just say I was a victim, sitting right here in the Ethical Society, deeply harmed, and I'm still feeling the effects of that crime. And I'm saying to myself, why are you only thinking of the perpetrator? Nobody's thinking of me. I'm still suffering, and I'm not the only one who feels this way. There are a lot of block-headed people who can't even think that there's something more than this for the future of presenting future crimes. So what do you say to that? That'll shut them up.
Well, thank you very much for that question. I'm getting a little bit of an echo because I can hear myself there. So first of all, we don't want to shut up people that are talking about victims of crimes, right? We totally don't want to minimize that experience at all. We want to make sure that they are supported as well. But the reason for all these bills is not to ignore their pain. It's to understand that creating more dysfunction and toxicity and poison in society isn't going to be the thing that is going to heal them, and isn't going to be the thing that's going to heal that person from going out and doing that again, right? And so we want to make sure there are programs and supports. I know it feels like, oh, we're totally focusing on the people who committed the crimes, but we're really trying to look at this holistically and heal everybody. And as you saw in the video, incarceration is passive. It's not accountability. It's not accountability. And it actually exacerbates a feeling of all the reasons why the person may have committed the crime in the first place. And so, in my mind, this is also about making sure that there are no further victims of crime, that we start to look at human beings, all the human beings together at the same time as everybody who needs support. And that's the way to create the kind of interventions that we need to make sure that crimes are not being committed. That's really the overall. I hope that was helpful a little bit.
Who else? Yeah, I want to do the room. Anybody else in the room first? No? Okay, let's go to online. I know I can't see who put their hands up first. Frank? Okay, Frank, you're number one for takeoff.
Hi, Susan. You know, we've had restorative justice around for quite a long time, particularly in Scandinavian countries, in this country as well. We've had an emphasis on early childhood education, which has been known to be effective to reduce the incidence of crime later in life, as well as other kinds of community supports. It seems like the facts have not been persuasive to most people and to legislators. And I'm wondering if you have any strategies how we can change course and make them more effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of restorative justice, it's such a shame that it has not gained, we kind of say, has it gained traction, right? It hasn't really gained traction. And I think that's because it's not being practiced in enough places. And I think we really need to up the ante on being able to tell stories about how successful restorative justice can be. And so I think part of our strategy has to be able to share stories, right? I have a friend who was abducted when she was 12 years old and assaulted. And uh, she has gotten involved in restorative justice, has reached out to her abductor over the years, all of these things, right? But it's still kind of hidden. So I think that we as institutions need to do a better job of the practice and also telling the stories of success behind it. And that's tied to um, the people who have come out of prison who are now doing good work, right? That's all part of the restorative justice narrative. We all need to be sharing those stories more. But before we can share those stories, we have to get involved in them ourselves. And so it feels like an uphill battle. It really does. I really appreciate that question.
Great, thank you. Pat, you're next.
Thank you. Hello, Susan. Um, Regarding when you were talking about bills and specifically raise the age and bail reform, you kept on saying they. Who are they?
The people that are against any sort of reform to the criminal legal system. So when I say they, I mean the people who are just not willing to engage in any kind of dialogue about the harms that the system does, how it is repeated harm, the people in power who are trying to keep this system intact, right? To make sure that our only interventions are policing in your neighborhood and then straight into prison and jail without any kind of rehabilitation intervention, early interventions. We don't want to spend our money on that. We want to keep spending our money on this. So that's who I mean. I mean the people that are invested in keeping this power structure the way it is.
Thank you.
Great. David? David, can you hear us? Just unmute. He's getting there.
Can you hear
There we
me?
go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, oh, Thank you, Susan, for the wonderful talk. Is there a thing called the prison industrial complex? And if so, what kind of financial forces are we fighting against?
Yeah, there is. And we're fighting against major financial forces. That's who I mean by they. And so people who are invested in keeping the power structure the way it is and the system the way it is. The prison industrial complex is everybody's heard of the military industrial complex. The prison industrial complex means that there are private companies making money from this, which means that the stock market is involved, right? It means that there are vendors that are pumping, that have contracts for food and for uniforms and for trainings and for all of these things. The vendors are invested, all the stakeholders that are invested in this, all the salaries of corrections officers, right? All the salaries of even the private individuals that are working inside the prisons and jails. That's the prison industrial complex. That's what we're up against. That's why this is massive. And we need people to be as outraged about this as we are about immigration right now, because this has been going on forever, right? We don't have to have our outrage only in one place, because we need to recognize these are all connected. The stuff that's going on with immigration right now is connected to the same power systems and the same divide and conquer that has been keeping communities of color incarcerated for centuries now. So thank you for asking that question. We are up against huge amount of power, and we need everybody in this fight.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
Thank you.
So, Susan, I just make one very quick comment. What you said about law and order really resonated with me. Over 50 years ago, when I was a college freshman, the book that I read that I think people still read is The Paranoid Style of American Politics by Richard Hofstadter. And it's all about how you can engender that paranoia to make the belief that there's criminality all over the